Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. Oh, this is going to be a conversation today. This is one I'm very excited to have this conversation because it's about a matter that's near and dear to my heart personally. We're going to be talking about healthcare, but secondary to that, the figure character I don't know that we're going to be talking to today has a very long history, not just in medicine, so that he can speak to these issues with some degree of authority, but also with the politics. He's a bit of a political animal over the last, I don't know, 30 years or so. Um, and he's got some very, very strong opinions and some very strong ideas about what needs to be done to address the healthcare crisis that has again bubbled up into the public consciousness after the unfortunate death of a gentleman in Edmonton. We're going to get into all of that. But before we do, I'm very excited to welcome to the program Dr. Raj Sherman. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hi, Nate. Belated Merry Christmas to you and Happy New Year to you and to all your audience.
And
Thank
to
you.
you and to you as and your family as well. Um, Before we get into the very light fare of how did healthcare get broken and is it possible to fix it? What should we do? Um, I'm familiar with a bit of your bio because we've chatted before, but it goes so deep that I think it's really important to highlight it. So, if you would, for a few minutes, if you could just talk about who Raj Sherman is, how you uh, got into medicine, how you got into politics, what the roles were that you have in politics, and if you could keep it to under 30 minutes.
You know what, Nate? I can't be long-winded. My grandfather came to Canada in 1906 to the West Coast. Well, there's nobody in this country, and he was a young man, 17 years old, in search of a future. And after India gained independence and freedom, he went back home. My father came in 65. His father would never let him come. And my father had a fascination with this amazing country called Canada, a brand new country. And Alberta wasn't a province till 1905, as you know. Um, I was born in a little refugee village in the middle of nowhere because my mother's family had to flee that part of India that was cut off to make Pakistan. Dad came to visit for the first time in 1972 to India. I met my father at age 7. And I grew up on a sugarcane and dairy farm. My mom's father was a physician, as were her brothers, and he was a farmer. And welcome to Canada, Squamish, BC in 1972. It was cold in this country. It was interesting and damn cold here. And we lost all our family. It was really tough being a fresh, brand new immigrant who didn't speak the language. And this was like a foreign place to me. Life was good in India. It was very good in India. I came to Alberta in '84. I worked in the mill in Squamish. Did every immigrant job there is, cleaning, scrubbing floors, working in construction, working in the hotels in Whistler. I still got my taxi cab driving license from Calgary in '86. I came to be a teacher in Alberta, but there were no jobs, and I ended up in med school. Started off in pediatrics, and I quit after a month because I was too young to specialize. We were 20-year-old kids getting into med school back then in '86. And I was a family doctor. I worked in Nelson, BC in the early '90s, '91, and emergency was just a summer gig for me in '92. There was no emergency specialty, and I went back to school. So I was the very first emergency trained trauma doctor from the Edmonton training program. And in 2005, I got invited to a doctor's meeting. Here I am, a single dad caring for his ailing father. I went to the washroom and they elected me Alberta's head ER doc. And we had a crisis on our hands when the province grew from 2.5 to 3.5 million during the oil boom when the Mideast wars happened. Everybody came here because oil was 147, cost of living was low. We had lots of high-paying jobs, so the world came here. But when the world comes here to work in the oil and gas industry, the teachers and the doctors and the nurses, the police officers, the social part of the systems doesn't come. So we had literally had people dying in waiting rooms. My own father in 2008 waited 8 hours, had a massive heart attack. And here I am running for politics for the Progressive Conservative Party. And my dad had a massive heart attack and almost died. It shortened his life to the point where he did die a couple of years later. So that's why I've spent most of my life advocating for solutions to a very complex problem. And yeah, so here we are. I've been a co-parent. I have two children, 30 and 33. My daughter's a family doc. My son's a filmmaker. I did get suckered into running for politics. It didn't work out so well. I'm not a politician. You know, when you're a physician, when you're a healthcare worker, you call it as it is. And, we got good jobs. We run for politics to repair the system. We're not into this left wing, right wing. We're into right and wrong, not left and right. And it didn't work out well for me, and it didn't work out for well for a couple of premiers either at that time. Healthcare has actually been 45% of provincial spending, and there were a bunch of premiers that ended up resigning or getting kicked out by the party when I was in politics. So here we are again, massive population growth because we have a good economy, and we don't have enough workers, healthcare workers, to provide the care, and as a result, the emergency department is the canary in the coal mine. So it's a symptom of a broader system problem. And when people are waiting 12 hours and dying in waiting rooms, it's not an ER crisis. It's not an ER problem. It's a system crisis. And here we are talking about it again.
I love that you refer to, and I want to go back to a couple of the other roles that you've had because you left out the quality council thing, and I feel like that maybe is a little bit relevant. But I love that you refer to the ER as a symptom of the greater problem. That locks for me as I mean, full disclosure right out of the gates, everybody knows that anyways. But I work as a paramedic, and so one of the things that I always like to see is like if somebody is presenting with a problem the first question is that a direct problem? Like if somebody got a chunk of rebar through their arm, okay, that's pretty direct. But if somebody passed out and they fell and hit their head, I look at the cut on their head largely as a symptom, and I want to know why they passed out. That's a much more bigger issue. But it seems like in healthcare, that's the one thing that politicians refuse to do. They look at oh, there's a cut on a head, we should deal with that, and let's not worry about why they passed out. Um, so I really just I love that the use of that word. I'm just going to geek out there. I'm bad with. I could make this whole conversation about weird medicine stuff, but I don't know that my audience would appreciate this. Now you were also with your political hat. Let's clear some things out of the way here, just so that they're cleared out of the way. You were the associate minister of health, correct?
That's correct. I was in the Progressive Conservative Party from 2008 to 2010. That's when, I didn't really have much say in healthcare at the time, Nate. When on one night, Minister Leipert at the time just fired everybody who ran healthcare, created AHS. We really didn't have a plan. It was sort of done on a napkin. And the system was already in crisis. So they fired everybody who managed the system. And we turned a crisis into an absolute disaster at that time. And I had to go to the premier. I said, you know what? You got to fire the minister and you got to fire the deputy minister. And we have major problems here. So Nate, this is like a deja vu for me personally, as a frontline healthcare provider, and as well somebody who was in governance, regardless of party. But you're in the legislature, you're making these decisions that are affecting people's lives. And this ministry is the number one spending ministry across the country, 40 to 45% of all provincial spending. And every government is broke right now. Nobody's getting this right in this country. This is not just a made in Alberta problem, by the way. This is a national problem. It's a bit more acute here because of the decisions that we made and because people want to move to Alberta. It's a lovely place to live. People are wonderful here. Blue skies, low cost, low taxes, low cost of living, and friendly people. So we have a supply demand problem. We have a lot of illness out there and not enough healthcare providers to provide that illness. And we have not made the investments in the right places in healthcare for the last 30 years when we broke the system in the mid 90s.
I'm going to jump on that. And I still want to get to Health Quality Council because, like, your political career is wild, man. You started with the PCs, unless I'm mistaken, and then in a
Yeah.
move that's a little whiplashy, you ended up going to the Liberals, and you were the Liberal leader. And then in a move that's even more whiplashy, I think to the casual observer who's viewing things through the lens, not necessarily of somebody who wants to fix the system. But then you went to you tried to run for UCP leadership, and then you ran for UCP in Edmonton. So there's like this whole political career that I'd love to be able to unpack. But before we get that, I want to talk about the right places. because you said we haven't put the energy or the effort into fixing the right places. And this gets to part of the broader part of the conversation. So we'll just take a little rest stop on this topic. But what would you say are the right places?
Well, Nate, if you want to fix a problem, you need to understand what the problem is. When I started in 1992, and many of the healthcare providers, I'm 60 now, and so many people that worked in the system, nurses, doctors, they understand how the system was run. Premier Lougheed actually structured a very good healthcare system way back when. But the Royal Alexandra Hospital, we saw 100,000 visits a year when I started. We only had one doctor after 3:30 in the morning. Can you believe it? We had a fully integrated system where the backbone of the system back those days was primary care and family medicine. Most doctors first became family doctors, and then we went on and specialized. Family doctors used to admit patients to hospital in major urban settings, delivered babies, and did long-term care, ran their office. They ran the system, and consultants and specialists consulted. In 93, the Bear Stoddart report came out. Maurice Bear, and he's a healthcare economist. Interestingly, his younger brother's an emerge doc, and I don't think he consulted him. It said healthcare doctors are too expensive, reduce the number of doctors. It's a cost control measure. They'll order fewer tests. So every politician across the country, not just Premier Klein, they cut med schools. They drove 20% of the physician and nursing workforce out of the country straight to the US. And when family doctors were driven out of the hospital, consultants now had to do every admission. You know, in Edmonton, if you were a Royal Alec patient, you always came to the Alec because that's where your doctor worked. We had continuity of care 24/7, and that doctor looked after every generation of patient, all three generations, kids, mom and dad, and grandma, grandpa. The family doctors were driven out of the hospitals because they cut 1,500 beds out of Edmonton in 1 year. They blew up a 1,000-bed hospital in Calgary, sold two other hospitals. In those days, we had 4.3 beds per thousand population. And after Premier Klein, he sort of overdid it. He overdid it. We went down to 2.4 beds per thousand population. Today, we have 8,800 beds in the system and 5 million people. So somebody please take a calculator and do the math. Here's the math. You got 1.7 beds per thousand population. And of those beds, for the last 30 years, 25 years, not many politicians have paid attention to investing in home care, prevention, rehabilitation care, and long-term care. So of those 8,800 beds, we got 1,400 folks who are not sick. They're wobbly. They can't go home, but they're wobbly. So you can't send them in their house. You got to break a hip. You know this, Nate. And you bring them to us from, you know, because of lack of investment in community care for the vulnerable and the fragile, and even we have a ton of homeless folks right now plugging up hospital beds as well. That shouldn't be there. So you take those 1,400 beds out, we're actually at about 1.46 beds per thousand population. European countries are at 4.2. Secondly, the primary care system was broken and preventative care system was broken way back when. Young med students, when you got, and I'm not blaming my colleagues, by the way, these are governmental policy decisions. When you got one group of doctors making 1 million a year, radiologists, cardiologists, dermatologists, plastic surgeons, this and that, wonderful people. They're my colleagues, they're my friends. When the government makes policy decisions that benefits one small group, but that comes at the expense of either cutting wages of family doctors, geriatric doctors, pediatrics, mental health generalists. Guess what young kids want to do in grade 11 and 12? They're deciding what kind of specialist they want to be. So nobody wants to be a family doctor. It doesn't pay. It's a tough job. And there's inflation. Well, geez, my daughter's a family doc. She said, Dad, I'll make less than a nurse if I do chronic disease management. So that's the issue. We got a broken primary care system in the country and this province, a broken prevention care system. Nobody wants to get vaccinated. Might cause autism, Got to be careful.
I thought that was Tylenol that causes autism now. It's
Well,
so hard to
well, that
confirm.
too. That too. This is absolutely ridiculous, Nate.
It doesn't. It
Come
doesn't,
on,
for the
man.
record.
Everyone's vaccinated who's say alleging that they got autism. I guess they might have autism. This is silly, you know. And then so that's the problem. Lack of home care, long-term care, lack of primary care. 5 million people don't have a family doctor in Canada. 1 million people in Alberta. And then prevention. It's a supply demand issue. So, and secondly, we are victims of our success. There is such amazing stuff we can do in healthcare. Seriously, once you get in, there is amazing healthcare, excellent healthcare you get in Canada and Alberta. By the way, amazing things happen every day in the system. One, because of we got one of the best healthcare education systems in the world. Even in Alberta, I'll always defend Alberta's. Once you get in, it actually is world class healthcare. Okay, and so people are living longer. People used to have cancer in the olden days and die of cancer. Now you get cancer, you live long enough to have a heart attack and a stroke and a second cancer. I think that's a good thing. So we got a lot of chronic disease out there, and not enough workers to provide that care.
Now, there's a couple things you threw in there that I want to unpack because I just want to double check the numbers. I was doing some back of the napkin math as you were talking about the bed capacity prior to the decline cuts. And there's people who will say, "Oh, but he got rid of the debt and the deficit, and that's all very wonderful." And for sure, yeah, like not having debt and not having deficits is delightful. But the question does need to be asked at what, excuse me, at what cost? And from what you were saying there, between Klein, right before Klein did all of his cuts, and now, we have seen a 60% roughly reduction in the number of available beds per 100,000 people. Am I getting that right?
Mate, like I said, data and facts matter. In Alberta, we're at 1.7 beds per thousand population. We had 11,700 acute care beds for 2.5 million people way back when in 1992, 93. Today, we have 8,800 beds for 5 million people who are older and sicker. So here is the healthcare funding slide. I don't know if you can see this. So you can see that big dip in the mid 90s. Healthcare was not unsustainable. Healthcare expenditures took off after the cutbacks in the mid 90s. When we overcut and the governments of the country, starting with Alberta, killed primary care and family medicine and prevention. And for the last few years, healthcare is a complex ministry. There's population growth and inflation, and then there's aging, and then there's technology. So you cannot apply free market principles to the healthcare industry. It doesn't work. And we have actually, when you cut for population growth and inflation, healthcare funding has actually been cut in Alberta for the last number of years. Government had lots of debt and deficits. And so by the way, Danielle Smith isn't the only one who is impairing the delivery of healthcare. Premier Kenny and, as you know, Minister Chandro, he's a buddy of mine. And I told him, I said, Tyler, you wrecked 10 years of my hard work. You ripped up the doctor's contract, gave the family doctors the biggest pay cut in history, and started driving them out of the province. You want to wreck healthcare? Cut primary care and prevention and family medicine. And then they ran an ad campaign in Eastern Canada. Come to Alberta. Let's invite 100 million. Let's invite 1 million people here, and cut our family doctors and nurses. Go to work with war with the doctors and nurses and healthcare workers. Fantastic recipe to cause this problem that we have today. People dying in waiting rooms.
Now, boy, you gave me a lot to try to unpack there. Um, let's address the supply and demand piece as much as we can here, because I think that there's some nuance that's being lost in the greater conversation. Not hopefully not this conversation. But looking at that decrease in available beds, that's a huge problem if things stay at baseline. But one of the things that I've been made aware of for quite some time is it's not just a product of the overall population. Most 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds, unless they like ride an e-scooter into a curb, they're not presenting at the emergency room all that much. The typical demographic tends to be uh, seniors with more complex care, or people who don't have access to other services because, as you said, the primary care stuff is not available. Uh, it seems to me that there has been this predictable balloon of older folks, the baby boomers, that have been working their way through the age pipe, And they're now at a point where they require all of those services that you were just talking about. They require the more complex disease management. They require the long-term care. They require the additional supports. And as you said, we haven't invested in any of those things. So there is, and this is what I'm hoping you'll correct me if I'm wrong, there is to some degree a supply and demand piece in regards to the who needs to access the system, but it's not who's being presented in the media, um, and certainly not the social media conversations, because the one thing that we've heard over and over and over again, unfortunately, even from the Premier of Alberta, is it's all the immigrants' fault. And that just does, unless I'm mistaken, that just does not track with the data.
Hey, Nate, I'm sick and tired of hearing this immigrant bashing and blaming, man. When I came to Squamish, Packy go home and all this kind of stuff in the 70s in Squamish, BC. Which immigrant? The Vikings? The Newfies? New Brunswickers? The brown guy? The Chinese guy? The black guy? The fat guy? Come on. This is bullshit, Nate. I'm sick and tired of people immigrant bashing. The reality is we're all immigrants. We're all the children of immigrants. And this is the solution. In fact, we have a ton of Canadians right now, new Canadians and old Canadians. You know, my children are born here just because they're brown. I don't want some redneck blaming my children for causing the damn problem. Okay, they didn't cause the problem. We have a lot of people from somewhere else in the world who, you know what? They're doctors and nurses and engineers or teachers, and they're busy working jobs that they're not trained to do in their home country. Let's invest in their education, upgrading, credentialing. Let's get them working in the system. In fact, the immigrants, the new Canadians, are part of the solution too. We have so many of our kids because Premier Kenney had to balance a budget because they cut the University of Alberta by at least $300 million, and I heard 600 million. They cut nursing schools and med schools. So many of our kids went to train abroad, born and raised in Canada, regardless of your color. You're born and raised in Canada. White kids and brown kids and Chinese kids, to all you rednecks out there, um, they're trained in Ireland, Australia, Bahamas. Let's bring them back home. Their mom and dad live here. The neighbors are here. Let's invest in their credentialing, in internship, residency. Let's get them working. Instead, they're marrying, young men and young women from those countries, and they're staying there. So new Canadians are actually part of the solution in this issue. And to all these guys that want to drive a million people out of here, it's going to collapse our economy. Imagine that taxpayer base. You're going to destroy the service part of the sector. Who's going to work in the rigs? Who's going to work in the social services side of the system? And drive a million taxpayers out? You're going to have no construction jobs. Nobody's going to need a house. So this immigrant bashing, I'm sick and tired of this crap, Nate. That's
No,
what weak people and weak leaders do. Blame the immigrant. That's bullshit.
100%. And I'm glad you addressed it so well. And I just want to highlight for my own uh, reasons. Uh, the argument that people like to advance to avoid the xenophobic label, or being told that they're immigrant bashing, is whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm not against immigration. We just need the right kind of immigrants. And I don't know what that is. And I say this having a conversation today with you, sir, because as you said in your introduction, when you came to Canada, you were not an ER physician. You were not a public servant. And you came to Canada, you scrubbed floors, taxi drove, and you ended up becoming an ER physician who has saved countless lives, as well as the work that you've done in public service and the work that you've done for healthcare advocacy. So when people say the right kind of immigrants, I kind of don't know what they're talking about, because you're ignoring the potential that exists inside of every human being if it's supported properly. And that's my little rant about that.
Nate, here's the facts. Facts and data matter. Back in 2008, when I was elected, you know, I was an associate minister of health, and we met the federal cabinet, Prime Minister Harper and Jason Kenney. At that time, I said, I have some major concerns. When my turn came to speak, I said, at that time, our birth rate was 1.7 in Canada. And in the Edmonton zone, low income young women under the age of 17 were having babies 11 times the rate of high income young women. I said, we are an aging and ailing population. I'm 2 years after the baby boom finished. Okay. So we have an aging and ailing population. There was a ton of kids after the war, right? And now no one's having kids. Okay. I said, so And secondly, it's not just the seniors. It's not the silver-haired tsunami. When processed food came in and inactivity came in, we are finding in the front lines younger and younger people getting chronic disease, heart attacks in the 40s, strokes, type 2 diabetes, 20-year-olds, you know, the generation that drank too many damn big gulps and watched too much TV and didn't have mandatory gym. So we are having three generations, grandparents, their children, and the kids. The kids are developing chronic disease, obesity, mental health and addictions, type 2 diabetes in their 20s and 30s. So we have a plethora of chronic disease coming down the pipeline. Please don't blame the seniors. They eat healthy food and they moved. They're just sick in the last couple of years of their life. It's their grandkids. I am scared to. So I said, look, I said, what's your plan to get Canadians to have more babies? If people aren't going to have more babies and healthy babies, what's your immigration plan to immigrate immigrants from all over the world, white people and brown people, and Chinese people and black folks and South Americans and Eastern Europeans? What's your plan to immigrate young families like my mom and dad, who are both teachers? They bought three, four kids. We got an engineer, we got a doctor, we got an IT guy. My oldest brother, he's the least educated guy in my family. And you know what? He's an electrician in Calgary. And we got nine grandkids in our family, and they're all doing something worthwhile and paying lots of tax. So, what's your plan to immigrate young families? And two, to increase our population to care for the aging and ailing population. Two, what's your plan to have a participation program on steroids to get young people moving and eating healthy? In fact, get society moving and eating healthy. And what's your healthcare plan? Who's going to look after us old? Who's going to look after a guy like me? I'm 60. I'm probably going to be diabetic soon because my dad was, and I'm probably going to have a heart attack in the next 5 years. Um, who's going to look after us when our kids are not going to live to the same age as their grandparents? And I said, healthcare costs are going to balloon, and every provincial government is going to be bankrupt. And you guys are going to want to say, hey, privatize the system. And really, the backbone of the system is primary care and prevention and care of the elderly and vulnerable, like the Europeans did. So, yeah, this is not just a provincial problem. It's a federal problem. It's a provincial problem. It's a municipal problem. We're all in this together. Let's stop laying blame. Let's focus on solutions to this very complex problem that defines us who we are as Canadians. You don't have to
Before
get out your visa when you're dying and lose your house.
before we stop laying blame, I just want to explore one little thing. Um, I take no exception to your arguments that it's we have these increased incidences of serious disease in younger people. I know that when I go to people in their houses, my threshold for the ages of a heart attack has gotten way lower than it was when I started 15 years ago, and that's because experience has taught me, oh shit, that's what their ECG is doing today. I didn't think that somebody who was 37 would do that. So I take no exception with any of those points, but I think it is important to, I'm a big believer in trying to hold power to account, and I think it is important to highlight that while these problems are global, the processed food problems are global, the sedentary lifestyle problems are global. Alberta has made choices to not make those things better, but exacerbate the situation. Whether we're talking about the blowing up and selling off of hospitals, whether we're talking about the blowing up and selling up of the entire healthcare system, um, the disintegration of healthcare, as I like to call it, much to Dr. Paul Park's chagrin. Um, eh, we have not made the right choices in regards to how to address that. Is that a fair statement?
Nate, I would say we've made a lot of choices, some very good,
What are the
some
good
not so
ones?
good, and some
What are the
very
good
bad.
ones? Tell me what
Some
the
very
good ones
bad.
are.
Well, no, you know what? So, as you rightly mentioned, yes, I was in the Progressive Conservative Party as associate minister, and I left the government. At that time, I said, our government is a threat to public safety. I can't support this anymore. I was independent for a year. We put in a lot of solutions at that time. I said, hey, look, if you want to repair the system, you got to invest heavily in the community. And so to Premier Stelmach, I'm going to give him a lot of credit, by the way. I said, look, AHS, when you created it, Funding was $7 billion for the hospitals, all the regions. I said, we have grown massively. So Minister Jeans was Desky, and Jay Ramatar was the deputy minister. And after Minister Lightfoot was removed, um, he bumped up the baseline funding for Alberta Health Services when they created it from 7 billion to 8 billion to do catch up. I said, one, you can't bring new staff in if you don't retain the staff you currently have. Sign all the contracts, stop fighting with the staff, and hire all the new grads. All the kids that are born and raised, hire them all. That's what we did. Healthcare funding cannot be a year to year budgetary item to be cut and improved year to year. I said these programs have to be funded on long term cycles, 5 to 10 year cycles, but political cycles are 4 years. So, to Premier Stelmach's credit, he actually put a 5 year funding cycle. 3 years of 8%, 8%, 8%, then 6 and 6. I said, you can bend the cost curve if you invest in the right areas. And Premier Stelmach actually gave the family doctors who do chronic disease management a massive pay raise. And we started training young doctors in rural areas when they're young, before they find a life partner. I said, if you take a rural kid, train him in an urban med school, they meet somebody else from somewhere else who's a lawyer or engineer or, they're not going back to Peace River. I'm a small town boy from Squamish. They ain't going back to Squamish or Beaver Lodge. So you got to train them in rural areas when they're young. And thirdly, you got to give them help, a primary care network team. Give them nurse practitioners, nurses, dietitians, pharmacists. It's a team, social workers. It's a team game, healthcare. Do what we do in emergency out there so you don't get sick. So we went from 24% of med school students choosing family medicine as a career in 2008 to 50% in my daughter's class in 2018. And when I returned to the front lines in emergency, you know what? We only had 5 admitted people blocking up the department. The system was flown. It wasn't fixed, but I'm telling you, it was repaired. I did have to put a lot of pressure on the government as official opposition leader to make sure they didn't fall back. And then in comes, you know, Minister Chandro. They undid all those decisions, went to war with the docs, invited 1 million people here, and here we are. Now, Premier Smith and I, we've been friends. We both served as leaders in the. She called me up, said, Doc, I need your advice and help. I want to be premier and run for leadership. What should I do? So this is what you need to do. So Dr. Mark McKenzie and I wrote the EMS offload protocols, and Dr. Cowell implemented them. And you're a paramedic, so that's where that came from, pre-election. And I said, you got to invest massively in med school education. So I'm going to give kudos to Premier Smith. She increased med school enrollment by 38%, 120 new seats, half of them in rural Alberta, starting with Medicine Hat, Lethbridge and Grand Prairie. That's a good thing. But the day after the election, and I said, what you got to do is you got to invest massively in the community. We have 1,400 people in hospital that shouldn't be there. You got to get them out so the system can flow. Because what that causes, it's rush hour traffic. When you have 1,400 people plugging up acute care beds, half of them are in Edmonton. We have 500 to 600 people today in Edmonton. That's almost 2 full hospitals, plugged up by wobbly people who aren't sick. The emergency department becomes an in-hospital holding area. We have 275 ER beds in Edmonton. On any given day right now, we got 200 to 250 admitted people in the department. We're running a city that serves 2.5 million people at 25 to 75 beds every day. And that's why sick people are waiting so long for care. And that's the underlying problem why that poor young man died waiting 8 hours with chest pain. It's not the sore throats and runny noses causing the problem. They're there because there's no family doctors. It looks like they're the problem. I get it. Oh, there's sore throat, runny nose, sprained ankle, or even the drunk. People are blaming that guy or gal for the problem. It looks that way because they're sitting in the waiting room waiting 12 hours. The real problem is we got a lot of sick people waiting in waiting rooms, and they can't get into an emergency bed in a timely fashion because ER is plugged up by admitted people. Hospitals are plugged up. 25% of hospital beds in Edmonton are plugged up by old wobbly people who shouldn't be there.
I want to clarify a term and then I want to explore something you said there. Just because I see this happen in my conversations with people in the wild. When you're talking about admitted patients, you're not talking about people who have made it into the back of the ER. You're talking about people who are complex enough or who have illnesses or disease or injuries that are significant enough that they need to be moved from the ER to the hospital proper. Um, and there's no space to put them in. And that's what you're talking about when you say admitted patients, correct?
Absolutely. So Nate, you're a paramedic. You bring somebody in or somebody walks in. They're sick. We see them eventually. We do all the tests. We determine this patient's really sick. They got to be admitted to hospital. They can't go home. Many people, we see them, they're actually quite sick. We fix them up and they get better after 6, 8 hours, good enough to go home. But these folks are really sick. They need oxygen. They need complex, specialized treatment and therapy for 3 days, 5 days, maybe seven. They've had a stroke. They've had a heart attack. They have a ruptured appendix. They got a broken pelvis. It's a major trauma. But you know what? They sit in the emergency department for, you know, well, here's the facts. Here's the data. The data is at 10% of people are admitted to hospitals, emergency departments, in the major trauma centers, 27 to 28 hours at the Royal Alec and the Peter Lougheed, 50 hours at the university. 10% of people at the other smaller hospitals in Edmonton are admitted 88 hours to the ED, 4 days in the ED. Seniors and who are fragile and sick, you decondition by the hour, Nate. You decondition by the hour. You're not getting any sleep. And you know all the shift changes that we have in ER. Well, if you don't get in the hands of a specialized doctor and nurse for that specialized care you need, we've done our job in the ER. Our job is done, man. Get out of my shop. Go upstairs where you belong with those fantastic people upstairs. But if you spend 3, 4 days in the ER, you're going to pick up another bug from somebody else. When you closely house 60 sick admitted patients in a close ER department with a bunch of curtains, you know what? You are going to spread infections throughout the whole damn hospital. And these people are going to be sicker by the time they get upstairs. The length of stay in hospital is going to be longer, and they're going to decondition. And if you lived independently, you're a senior, you might never ever go home again with your loved one. You're going to need to be placed in long-term care. This is the healthcare system problem. It's a flow system problem, actually. So if you want to repair the system, we need to hire a bunch of forensic auditors who understand healthcare, and we need to hire flow process engineers. Let's get the flow happening. I worked in the mill in Squamish. The guy running the mill in Squamish could run the health system. The new log can't come in if the sorting chain or conveyor belt goes down. And I worked in the green chain. And if you don't get the wood out of the green chain, you don't get the wrapped bundle out of the yard, the new log can't come in. It's a flow process problem.
I love your
Politicians don't
metaphors.
understand it.
I love your metaphors, sir. Um, Now, here's the other thing that I want to highlight because this gets to you referenced the gentleman who unfortunately passed away in Edmonton. And there's a lot of people who have expressed a lot of frustration and concern. I think it is important to highlight, as you already have, it's not a new problem. There have been people who have been dying in waiting rooms tragically for quite some period of time. I can think of at least three politicians off the top of my head who have cited their reasons for going into politics as being my family member died while waiting for care. So this is not new. It's gotten a lot of media attention because of how it was brought to people's attention, but it's not a new problem. And you were talking about the people who are they're drunk, they got the sprained ankles, they got the sniffles or whatever. They present to the ER because they don't have a family doctor, they don't have any idea what else to do. They're in the waiting room. Oh my gosh, there's all these people in the waiting room. They're not actually the problem because if the triage system was able to flow properly, the triage system being the sorting system to determine who's sick and who's not, and that gets into the whole CTAS thing, which is the rating that patients are given when they present. If it was working properly, the sick people, the really sick people, the people with the chest pain, they would be able to be seen quickly and appropriately. And the people with the sniffles, they're okay to wait because they're not going to die from the sniffles in the next 8 hours. Somebody with chest pain, obviously, I'm I don't need to tell you what the time expectations are, needs to be seen much more expeditiously. So, uh, yeah, I just wanted to really emphasize that the triage system that's supposed to get those sick patients into the ER, the system works, but it only works if the logs aren't jamming up the system, as you just said.
So Nate, it's called CTAS, Canadian Triage Acuity Score. Um, Score or scale? I'm not sure. It's on a scale of 1 to 5. One is a risk of imminent death, cardiac arrest, knife in the chest, seizure, massive trauma, okay? Severe respiratory distress. We got to see them immediately. And you know what? They get world-class care. That's not a problem. We get to them immediately. We drop everything we're doing in the emergency department and we attend to that individual. When that CTAS 2, that's where the problem lies. They should be into a emergency department bed within 15 minutes and have an emergency doctor see them. They're at risk of imminently becoming a 1. Chest pains are CTAS 1, 2, or 3. CTAS 3, they should be into a bed in 30 minutes. The 4s and 5s, sore throats, runny noses, we have an urgent care center in every emergency department. It's called RAS, Rapid Assessment Zone, or minor side. And they just sit in a chair, they sit in a hallway, they take minimal resources. In fact, sometimes the 4s and 5s, when they initially present, that's how they are. But then things change, they can become a 2 or a 1. So many 4s and 5s actually become 1s. So I'm saying do not tell people not to come to ER. Get so if we have a 60-bed ER, we have 55 admitted people in the department. We're essentially running a trauma department out of 5 beds. So the problem is the 2s and 3s are not getting in and they're leaving without being seen. I'm going to show you facts because facts and data matter. Here is the data. On the far right side, in August, our Edmonton hospitals were at 100 to 113% capacity before the flu hit. These are admissions in hospital upstairs. So we had people lying in waiting in hallways upstairs already. It's called the overcapacity protocol. The emergency doctors, when I was the head doc, we wrote that protocol in 2007. It was a crisis protocol. It's still in place a decade and a half later. The other evidence, our CTAS 1, 2s, and 3s are up in Edmonton and Calgary. Our 4s and 5s are actually down. So we have sicker people coming to ER. Here's the underlying problem, Nate. This is long-term care and community capacity for the last 15 years. See that red line? That's Edmonton.
Is it
No
supposed
one,
to
no,
go down like that?
no, it's supposed to be flat, maybe even go up. And you know what? I'm not going to blame Danielle Smith for this. This is every administration for a long time, okay? Including the NDP as well. So I'm not here getting political, beating anyone up. I'm just saying no administration because it's, you don't see the prevention, public care. You don't see the political win. Politicians want to win an election. They got to say, I did this. The reality is nobody did for 15 years what needed to be done. Invest in home care, long-term care, community care. So this is not just Premier Smith or Premier Kenny. In fact, Premier Notley as well, and the premiers before them. So, so this is why I'm not. I don't want to get into politics, bashing anyone. I just want to say, look, we as a society got to look after our vulnerable in the community. The emergency department is a canary in the coal mine, and the canary is dead across the country. So let's get going in looking after the vulnerable and elderly in the community. The Danish deliver such good home care and community care. You actually don't need much long-term care. We keep talking about the Danish, but we don't do what they did. Nobody invests in this stuff. They say it's cost too much money. I would say it costs too much not to do it. It costs it costs so much money not to do this.
I want to just to tie the loop on the structure of the ER that you talked to. The You talked about RAS and you talked about the bed availability there. And I think one of the things that's also not well understood by the general population is there are a lot of different types of beds inside of the ER. And when we're talking about those sicker patients, the CTAS ones for sure, and the CTAS twos as well, they require beds that will support the kind of care that they will probably need. You can't stick a CTAS-2 patient in a chair. You can't and then do all of the tests and provide all of the care. It's not appropriate. It doesn't work. And so you need the right types of beds for the right types of patients. But when those right types of beds are full, that's where triage nurses and physicians are forced into the position where they have to decide, what do we do in the meantime? And I know that there's plenty of physicians who go out and they assess patients in the waiting room, which is so suboptimal for so many reasons. That's not a good thing. When you have ER doctors in the waiting room, that is a sign that one wing has fallen off the plane and everything's on fire. It's a full props to the physicians that do it because they're trying to make the best of a bad situation, but it's a bad
But
situation at that point.
Nate, you know what? In the last crisis, we did this. We actually put a triage doctor at the front desk in every hospital when our population ballooned in the oil boom way back when, about 15 years ago. It's called the triage liaison physician. So they went and saw chest pains, belly pains. We didn't have any nurses to do the work. We saw people. We go, oh boy. So we ordered tests in the ER, and then it reduced people leaving without treatment. We earlier identified people. It wasn't ideal care. It is not ideal care, but it's a crisis solution. And we had people with heart attacks going from the waiting room straight to the cath lab. The end STEMIs, the one who didn't have a heart attack on the ECG, but it showed up on the blood test. We had people with appendicitis going from the waiting room straight to the operating room. It's not ideal care. We couldn't give them antibiotics because there were no nurses. The problem with admitted people plugging up ER, the emergency nurses and staff are spending 90% of their time on admitted people, not on the new emergency. So, yeah, we can put a doctor out there, but hey, yeah, it might be a fancy doctor, but I can't do my job if I don't have a nurse or a respiratory therapist or a unit clerk. It's a team game. So, our nurses are spending most of their time on admitted patients and not on the new emergency that comes in. And this is a 24/7 business. Heart attacks and strokes don't pick time of day to come in. Appendixes rupture, they rupture 24/7. And so, yeah, no, we need to put that triage doctor back in where the waiting rooms are flowing. And I've recommended this 2 years ago, 1 year ago, 4 months ago to all the ministers running the system. I said it's an expensive program, but I'll tell you, it'll save lives. And it may have saved the life of this poor individual, Mr. Srikumar. Secondly, we got a lot of life-threatening illnesses, Nate. You're a paramedic, other than heart attacks.
Oh yeah.
There are a lot of life-threatening illnesses in the waiting room. Horrible infections, broken pelvises, trauma, strokes, a lot of bad stuff. Even chest pains. Everyone thinks it's just a heart attack. There's aortic dissection. There's a collapsed lung, tension pneumothorax. There's pericardial tamponade. There's ruptured esophaguses that can cause chest pain. There's massive blood clots in your lung. We don't know what that is until an emergency doctor sees you in a monitored bed, and we gotta get an immediate chest X-ray on you. We gotta put a bedside ultrasound on your chest to make sure you don't have fluid around your heart or a collapsed lung. And we might even have to get an urgent CAT scan immediately to make sure it's not an aortic dissection or a massive blood clot in the lung. So it's not just a heart attack. This is why any chest pain, we don't know what it is till the emergency doc sees you and does the appropriate investigations. And and then if it's something serious, we got to get you in the hands of the super specialist doctor and nursing team upstairs to provide the fantastic care they're capable of providing. But hey, if you're sitting 8 hours in a waiting room, you may as well sit in a ditch.
Yeah. And that's like a thing that I think is so important for people to understand is, and this is something that took me a while to figure out as a paramedic working. It's getting access to the diagnostics. Once you have the diagnostics, the answers tend to crystallize real fast. But there's certain presentations that I see in the field all the time where I'm like, oh yeah, we're just going to go get you tests because I can think of 10 different things that this could be, and I have no way to rule any of them out. And so getting people access to those diagnostics is critically important.
And you got to have the highly skilled people to do the investigations ASAP. You can't delay. You know, in a heart attack, we say time is muscle, as you know. If you have a stroke, time is brain matter. If you're having a heart attack, you got to be in the cath lab upstairs to open that artery up within 2 hours. Same with a stroke. We got to get that clot out. Otherwise, you got permanent damage for life. So, Nate, I think there are solutions. Let's talk solutions.
Well,
Okay.
that's what I was hoping to get to next, because one of the big debates that's going on right now, and I think that you've articulated a very important piece. There are some people, I will not name them, as to avoid getting political, but there are some people who are advocating for more privatization in the healthcare system and expanding the privatization in the healthcare system. There's ideological arguments to be made, but I think those ideological arguments are prefaced on what I've seen you say in multiple venues, which is we shouldn't even be talking about that until we've got this other stuff dealt with. So, can you talk a little bit about that for a minute?
Nate, there's a time and place for private healthcare. You know, I'm not against it. Okay. But there's a time and place. First, we got to fix the foundation of the healthcare system that was broken many years ago. We talked about it early on. The foundation of a high performing and safe healthcare system that is cost effective is primary care and prevention, family medicine. Okay. And in addition to that, that's managing chronic disease in the community. Okay. Okay. That's primary care and managing the minor stuff as well. Okay. And then we also need a really good community care system for the vulnerable, housing the homeless, looking after grandma, grandpa, you know, grandpa's failing, that extra home care, choice programs, respite care for the caregivers, where, you know, my dad was sick, my mom couldn't manage him. So he went to Good Samaritan in Pleasantview, where dads would pick him up, take him there Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6 hours a day. Mom got a break. Dad got two baths a week with home care. Because he was at home, mom was essentially his nurse, provided all of his meds, his Indian food that he loved. And I said, Mom, cut out the salt and the grease and not too many carbs for his diabetes. You know, the Indians have too many carbs and salt and butter in the diet. And more importantly, the family we all pitched in. For those who have families, if you support families, there's a lot of great healthcare out there families can provide. And then, you know, assisted living, rehab care. So those are the building blocks of foundation: primary care, prevention, and community care system for the elderly and the vulnerable, like Denmark does. And that's exactly what European countries have done. And most importantly, human resources. You got to double up your nursing school, medical schools, healthcare schools. You got to hire all the staff, retain the staff, and train them, and get people working in the health system. Create an oversupply of workers so we can actually care for the amount of illness that's out there. So we can compete for jobs. So we can compete for people, right? Right now, patients are competing for healthcare workers that are few and far between. Those are the absolute building blocks. And after that, if you got lots of help, go ahead, have a couple of private clinics, go ahead. No problem. That's exactly what the Europeans did. They did layer in this private system on the side. So that's why I wrote the op-ed. I said, hey, fix the foundation first before you add another floor to your house. We got a broken foundation of our Canadian healthcare system. It's probably a bit more broken in Alberta because of recent decisions in the last two administrations. Not just Danielle, my good friend Jason as well. Okay. So we got to repair the foundation. And then, yeah, go ahead. I think it'd be an economic generator. But first, we got to look after Albertans first, not just the rich guys. And where the rich guys going to come from? They could come from somewhere else. We're going to take Alberta healthcare workers, work in a private clinic, and guess what? Patients are going to come from the U.S. and other provinces. We're already suffering and dying in waiting rooms. How about us, man? This is what I told Danielle Smith. That's why I ran for her. She invested in med schools. She helped put out the ER crisis. I said, deal with the ALC patients, the bed blockers. I don't like that word, but the ones plugging up hospital beds who shouldn't be there, and repair the damage that Tyler Chandler caused with the family doctors. I said, hire all the new staff, all the kids that we train, and let's stabilize the system. And then you can shuffle the deck chairs on the Titanic all you want. Okay? But the day after the election, we have had chaos and mayhem. We have fired how many CEOs and board chairs? And I sincerely believe the premier has gotten horrible advice. This isn't guys like Dr. John Cowell or myself or Dr. Lyle Oberg or Dr. Chris Eagle who advise this. We have non-medical people. The chief of staff was in charge of healthcare for 2 years. He's from BC. Um, I'll leave it at that. Athana Metsanopoulos, brilliant woman. She's a bean counter, and she was their person. Now we got a massive scandal, lawsuits, and now we've cut healthcare into four different ministries. Four ministers, lovely people. They're friends of mine. What the hell did they know about healthcare management? Everyone who understood management operations has been fired or quit and left or is silenced. Healthcare is 100% in the control of bureaucrats. Four ministries, four deputy ministers, four ADMs who have no healthcare background running the system. And now seven corridors. This is madness, Nate. I don't get it. I had it out with the premier in September. I said, Premier, what have you done? This isn't what we talked about. I haven't chatted with her for a year and a half. We text. I argue all the time on text with her, but that's why I resigned and quit the Health Quality Council. It's a nonpartisan data agency. I saw the data in February. We literally had people dying last February in waiting rooms at the end of that flu. I said, you must move immediately. Instead, they were busy still cutting the ministry into more pieces. And here we are. I think they're trying, and there are solutions. There are solutions, crisis solutions we can implement to reduce bad outcomes and deaths in waiting rooms.
I mean, you talked about the triage doctor being a potential solution. Again, that's a crisis solution. And I had, boy, as you were going on there, I had like five different jokes that I wanted to make. Um, e- Especially when you brought up the former AHS CEO, because it would almost suggest that some of the firings that have been made have not been made in the best interest of the healthcare system, but rather in the best interest of let's go with other things. Um, but what are the like? Oh, so I have two questions. What has Daniel Smith's response been to you when you've said, "Here's the solutions. Why aren't you doing them?" And for the general public, and anybody who I don't know wants to run for government or something, what are the solutions that you would recommend? So what is the premier's response been to your recommendations? I mean, obviously not positive because you quit the health council over not having them enacted, but do that in two parts if you would.
Well, no, Nate. They are doing some stuff. They are okay. So we met Minister Nixon and his folks, and they have a team put together. They are. We have some people in hospital in Edmonton that have been stuck in hospital 300 days, 200 days. Okay, and you know what? To their credit, they are working hard to move those folks out. They are. Okay, so I'm not going to say they're not doing anything. They are absolutely. I'm going to give credit where credit is due.
Yeah.
Now I have the data and the facts. In fact, Premier gave me the data. How many are waiting? And she has shared the data with me. So I'm going to give her kudos. Her challenge is the people that she's appointed don't operationally understand the problem. Okay. Now I'm gonna here. Let me get you. I'll get you the data that she has shared with me, and she cares about this. By the way, she does care. Okay. I'm not going to suggest the premier does not care. Okay. And
I'm not
and
asking you to, for the record. I'm not asking you to. I think uh, you have to be a special kind of deranged in order to be able to watch the tragedies that unfold in the healthcare system on a daily basis and just be like, ah, well, I don't care. So that's not in any way what I'm trying to suggest. I think that there's competing priorities, and my personal opinion, having absolutely no inside knowledge of the situation, would be that yeah, the direction that's being the advice that's being given is tragically misdirected.
now in all the ALC, so short-term solutions. 47% of the ALC patients that are plugging up hospital beds are there from 7 to 29 days. Solutions that we have given from the Health Quality Council, myself and Dr. David Zegan, who's the CEO, I said, let's go after low hanging fruit, the low cost, high impact, highly effective. So we got a lot of people that are sick, they're living independently, they're fragile, and their illness is better now, but they're wobbly. Let's immediately get them out of hospital into a transition unit, rehab them, and get them home. Those folks have been there 7 to 29 days. The problem is, I talked to my friends with the Christian Healthcare Association of Alberta. John Kopak runs them. They said we cannot take the high needs people that are permanent long term care placements that are 300 days. They said we can help out on the low needs, but the Ministry of Seniors, my dear friend Jason Nixon, the people who are executing his policies are not interested in the low needs people. They're only interested in the high needs. That also needs to be done. But you got to focus on the low needs. So let's take all of our folks that are in hospital, littered amongst every hospital ward. Let's put them on a specialized ward. You got them anyways. We got 600 people in Edmonton. Let's put them all on a special ward staffed with that special team with family doctors and nurse practitioners, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, social workers. Let's get them moving. Let's get them out of bed and let get them moving. If you take a vulnerable senior, keep them in a bed for 2 weeks, bring them their meal, and they don't get out of that bed, walk down the hallway for a meal and walk back and socialize, they're never going home, Nate. It's inhumane. What happens? Hospitals are the most dangerous people for wobbly, healthy people. You're going to pick up a dangerous bug. You're going to get put on a blood thinner. You're going to get a bed ulcer and a sore. You're going to break a hip. So these solutions have not been implemented. And that's what we need to do. So let's do that, and let's focus on the low risk, low cost, high impact solutions. Let's put a triage doctor at the front desk. In fact, we looked into something that nobody's looked at. Nate, in emergency, you'll get this. You paramedics will get it, and the emergency nurses will get it. We have a lot of patients that we admit to hospital. We call them quote unquote failure to thrive. You bring them into us all the time. You bring them into us. There's something called eviction by 911. In a lot of these private facilities, they can't make money off a low cost, high needs people. As soon as someone's placed, within a week, they call you guys. You bring them back to emerge. They're not sick. And suddenly we got them again. So our solution was, let's put a multidisciplinary team on call 24/7 in every emerge department. We'll do the workup and emerge. We can get all the labs, CAT scan, you name it, 2 hours, but we determined, okay, you don't really need to be in hospital. You're not really that sick, but you can't go home all alone. You're going to break your hip. You've been falling down. You haven't been eating for a week. Let's have a 24/7 team that looks after them at home. The community system work bankers hours 9 to 5. They need to work 24/7. To do that, there needs to be a massive investment in the budget to Minister Nixon's department from the Premier's office and cabinet. They need to put the investment into Minister Nixon so he can hire and pay the staff to provide that community care. That one foundation thing we talked about. We can do this, Nate. We could have done it yesterday, but better late than never.
Why aren't we?
Like I said, this is such a complex problem, and I believe the Premier has gotten really bad advice. You know, one thing I admire about Premier Smith, she does care and she listens. You know, one of the biggest problems? She listens to everyone. She got a whole bunch of crazy people giving her advice. People like you and the nurses out there and the people who understand healthcare are nowhere near her. You know, this is the problem. She's surrounded by wonderful Albertans who got some interesting ideas. Nate, I hate to laugh. This is very serious stuff. This is more a tragic laugh, please. This is no laughing matter, but this is really serious business. You know,
I
you
don't disagree, and I laughed at the same time as you did, because it's like a laugh or cry thing.
it's a
Um,
crying laugh. Yeah, it's a
yeah,
tragic laugh.
yeah.
People should be pissed right off, Nate. Look, even the conservatives. Look, I'm not going to any party. I'm a progressive conservative, a big P, small c conservative. I'm still a member of the UCP. So for me, this isn't about politics, okay? So we also need solutions. We need family doctors. Let's work with the family doctors. Let's hire all the nurse practitioners into the primary care networks, okay? Let's connect the primary care networks to these long term care facilities. and deliver higher levels of care there. When I was in government, they had a policy, we're replacing RNs with LPNs. And I warned them way back when, because that was the seniors ministry that made that decision. I said, people are living longer, they're more complex. Not only do we need RNs 24 hours a day in these facilities out there, we actually should hire nurse practitioners, be on call for their primary care network. Let's deliver higher levels of care in these facilities, like the auxiliary hospitals of yesteryear. If you're placed, you've had your end of life orders, let's deliver that care there. Let's bring lab and x-ray to you. Nate, there's a lot of paramedic program. There's a paramedic program right now where they come to your house and give you IV fluids so you don't need to come to a hospital. Okay? Let's invest in that kind of program. Higher levels of care in the community so you don't need to be admitted to hospital. Coming to ER is not the problem. It's coming to ER and getting admitted to hospital and not leaving the ER is the problem, not going upstairs and not going home because lack of investment in the community. So no, there are lots of solutions. It's just that people, there's a lot of noise out there, and people doing the operations don't understand this. They're really lovely people, but frankly, you don't want me running the oil and gas industry, do you?
I mean, I feel pretty comfortable with a sawmill, though, based on what you said earlier.
Yeah, I can
Um,
I can run the mill. I worked at every job of the mill.
should we be more aggressively subsidizing education? Like, should if the one of the things that constantly comes up is the shortage of healthcare workers. And so I find myself going, if we're looking for ways to spend money that are going to be positive investments in the future, should we not be like, hey, because I know there's companies on the private side of the paramedicine land that will say, hey, if you commit to working here for 2 years, we'll pay for your uh, next level of EMS accreditation because there's three levels. We'll pay for your schooling for your next level of EMS accreditation. Should the province of Alberta be looking at those sort of retention bonuses where they say, hey, if you've worked in the province of Alberta for X number of years, we're going to give you a bonus. And if you want to work in the province of Alberta as a healthcare worker, we'll pay for you to do your RN or your LPN or your RT or whatever. But you have to sign a contract that says you're going to hang around in the province for 5 years. Should we be
Nate,
doing that?
what you're talking about, one, training staff, two, hiring them, three, retaining them,
Did I
and
just
then
solve the
four,
problem?
and then four, attracting them. You're so on education, it's called the social determinants of health. Okay, let's talk about it. In fact, healthcare is the symptom. The ER crisis is the symptom. The underlying problem is not in the ER. It's a canary in the coal mine. It's everything else but the ER. So if you want to repair healthcare, good. Let's put that school nurse into the school system, back into the school system. Mental health problems start, at age 14, and they're really 14 to 24. When you're 18, you lose your family dog, your pediatrician. Suddenly, you're last in line in the health system. As soon as you become an adult, you don't have any health care. There's a million people who don't have a family doc. So let's put the mental health workers and school nurses in the school system. Let's put an ATCO trailer in every school parking lot and vaccinate every child for a family that wants them to be vaccinated, educate them on the risks and benefits of vaccination, and and let's get every child, making sure healthy breakfast and lunch programs, and let's teach kids how to cook. We got a lot of single moms out there working double jobs, two jobs, and poor kids are eating pizza pops and processed foods that are easy to microwave. Let's teach the kids how to cook in school so they can cook a meal for their parents. I taught my kids how to cook when I was a single parent. When I was elected, I had my kids full time, two teenagers. They were cooking for me, and they're very good chefs right now. Um, so yeah, so you talk about prevention and the social determinants of health. Why do we have 30, 40 kids in a classroom? That doesn't make sense. Okay. If you want to wreck healthcare, cut education and literacy programs. Okay. That's a surefire way to cause a massive healthcare crisis 10, 15, 20 years from now. Okay. Um, and then there's healthcare education. Yeah, we got to invest in healthcare education. To the Premier's credit, she did put more funding for med schools. Let's increase nursing school spots. And like I said, we got a lot of people from elsewhere right now from the planet Don't drive them out of the, don't send them back to where they came from. Invest in their credentialing. Let's get them working instead of driving taxi cabs and cleaning toilets in hotel rooms. Somebody's got to do that, but not a doctor or an engineer or a nurse. That's stupid. And let's bring our kids back from Ireland, Australia, Bahamas. Get them practicing here. But that requires an investment in post secondary education and the things that you talked about. If you create the best system to work and where frontline staff are engaged and involved, you know, I am opposed to stealing staff from our cousins and brothers and neighbors from the neighboring provinces. I'm opposed to that because fixing our problem, creating a crisis for our cousins down the road. Look, I'm sorry, that's not a solution, okay? That's not a solution. That's robbing Peter to pay Paul. But I think we can lead. Let's lead. Teach the country how to repair the system. I still think we can. I won't use the word fix. A Jewish rabbi told me, Rabbi Ari said, Raj, don't use the word fix. Nobody will believe you. It took a long time getting here, but I think we can achieve major repair work on the system. Why? Nate, we already did it way back when in 2008 to 2015 when I left. We did major repair works of the system. And I'm going to give Premier credit, Stelmach the credit. I got kicked out of his government by Ron Lightbird. He wanted me out because we were reversing all the decisions that he made. I said, Premier, you got to fire the minister. He's going to wreck your premiership, drive up healthcare costs. People are going to die. And that's what happened. I said, you got to reverse course right now. My advice to Premier Smith would be take a pause, sit down with 5, 7, 10 people, experts who understand the system. Sit down with the opposition leader. Take the politics out of it. There's no election happening tomorrow. Stop with the politics. Stop saying, okay, if we're doing something that's working, keep doing it. If we're doing something that's hurting, stop. Reverse course immediately, please. You can do your politics when election time comes. Right now, we probably need an emergency meeting in the Legislative Assembly, and we need the people who truly understand the system. Union leaders, healthcare leaders, members of the community, and saying, hey, one person can't fix it, one person can't wreck it. It took a lot of hands to get here. It's going to take a lot of hands to get out of this mess.
I love what you're saying, and I to your to just to not be the Danny Basher. I do believe it's a matter of political will, and the example that I have used for the better part of 2 years now, to back that up is when she first came into power. She said that the ambulances sitting in hospital hallways was unacceptable. People lying on the ground out in the community because there's no ambulances available is unacceptable, and through an exercise of political will, she implemented changes that caused ambulances to not do that for a little while. We're back to it now. But uh, political will can influence those kinds of changes. And it's one of the things that, people say, name one good thing Danielle Smith has done. And I'm like, okay, well, for a good chunk of time, she got the ambulances out of the hallways, and I got to give props there. I know she didn't write the policy herself, but she had the political will to say this is a change that has to happen because it's unacceptable. And so that's the kind of thing that can drive the kind of changes that I think that we're talking about today. It just has to manifest itself.
Hey, Nate, Premier's done a bunch of other good things, you know. I think on crime, she's strong. I think on economy, she's very strong. Okay. Working with Prime Minister Carney as well as President Trump. Okay. Healthcare, however, is a really big problem. Um, I had told her at the beginning, and I said, Premier, you didn't create this mess. But when you're a leader, it's your responsibility. For 1 or 2 years, we can get away with saying, hey, it was that guy. But year 3, year 4, it's going to be on you. And the challenge now is because all of healthcare is now 100% in the hands of government and bureaucrats, the delivery, the management of healthcare. With that comes responsibility, duty of care, and eventually is going to come political blame. if you do not make the right decisions to repair the system for the people, all the people, not just the rich people. Okay. And when you're elected, when you're a leader, you serve 5 million people, not just the 30,000 separatists and anti vaxxers who signed up to make you the leader. And when your elections are over, you don't care about whether you're a new Democrat, socialist, right wing guy, Republican guy. You're an Albertan, you're a human being. And you serve everyone when you're a leader, especially when you're a premier. Okay. Premier is not the opposition's job to poke holes in the government's game plan. But when you're the leader, you have a duty. Nate, I'm telling you, I would not want to be the premier tomorrow. I'm telling you, it is the toughest damn job in the country. As soon as you say something, somebody's going to be upset at you. Somebody's going to love you. A lot of people won't care about you. Politics, I'm telling you, it's worse than being. I'd rather give me a guy with a gunshot stab wound any day of the week or overdose. And, it was really tough being a political leader, I'll tell you. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for anyone who's elected, including the premier and cabinet ministers and the opposition parties. It is a hard job. Public office is not easy and is not for the faint of heart. I'll tell you that. Working in the ER is way easier, way better. I'll tell you.
I don't disagree with you there. I would humbly submit the argument, though, that I don't know how anybody runs to be leader of a political party or premier of the province in 2022 or 2023, not realizing that there's a massive healthcare crisis that needs to be addressed. So there is a part of me. I love the generosity that you're showing there, but there's a part of me that goes like, if you ran for any sort of office at the level where this is within your area of responsibility, as you just pointed out. Um, I don't know that you get to say like, "Oh, I had no idea healthcare was this bad because I can Google." And the news stories. I remember when I started in EMS. There were news stories in 2011 about the healthcare system and the EMS offload delays. This has been a chronic problem, and and it is really really important. I'm not laying the blame for the current state of healthcare and how we got here on Daniel Smith and the UCP. I think there's a whole bunch of people who need to take some responsibility for the blame. But I do think that there is a certain degree of, okay, but you said you wanted to do this, so now do this. That has to come into play as well.
Nate, so let's go back. If you want to go forward, you're going to go back in history. Okay. So what happened in 2010? Dr. Paul Parks collected about 322 cases of near deaths and near misses at one hospital alone in 2008. Okay, I was the head ER doc in Alberta, the spokesperson for all the ER docs in Alberta at the AMA, and then he took over section presidency when I ran for public office. I was associate minister of health, so here it is, Nate. I personally, as associate minister, leaked those 322 cases to every media outlet in the province and the country because our government was going the wrong way. How and why we created AHS. Okay. So this is why this is such an important thing because I think our Canadian health system at the point it's on the edge of a cliff. It defines who we are as Canadians. Hey, geez, if you want private healthcare, let's just move to Phoenix. It's warmer down there. People are pretty friendly down there as well. Um, and I believe elected officials want to make a difference, but you need to look at the evidence and you need to look at facts and you need to look at data. Okay, data matters, facts matter. Um, so let's get fixing this thing. And it's not a political membership. What bothered me about politics, you're in the governing party. And we implemented some really bad policies and we had to disagree. Opposition was actually right. Even broken clocks right twice a day. I go, why are we doing this? Those guys were actually wrong. Those guys are right. Even when I was opposition leader, half the time I was fighting my own damn party because they wanted me to fight the government all the time. I said, hey, if we form government, we would do 85% of what they're doing. So no, I'm not going to yell and scream at them on everything. And we have to have solutions to a problem. You can't just criticize. Do not criticize if you don't have a solution. Now, back to 2010, 2011. 2011, I was actually 2012, 2011. I was an independent MLA, and they were debating the Alberta Health Act. And I wanted to put in accountability when I was Associate Minister of Health. Okay. And high performing systems, the number one barometer of a health system is how long an admitted patient waits in an ER department before going up to the right bed. The UK, it was 4 hours. You had to be in and up, 4 hours, 19 times out of 20, in and out, home in 4 hours, 19 times out of 20, or to a transition unit. But you had to get out of the ER. So I talked to Frank Dobson, who was the health minister for Prime Minister Tony Blair. Dr. Matthew Cook was their head ER doc. He said, Prime Minister, it's not an ER problem, it's everything else but the ER. I said, so what did you guys do? How did you guys repair your system? It's a big problem now, but in the 2000s, it was one of the top systems in the world. And I went there personally to look at it. I sat in Paddington Hospital Friday evening. They had no waiting room. Nate, can you believe it? They had no waiting room. So they invested massively in the community, in the stuff we're talking about: home care, long term care, rehab care, prevention. They invested massively in primary care. They, in fact, cut the wages of the specialists to pay the family doctors more. The specialists were upset. You know, we got a guy making 1 million a year. Family doctor brings home 100 grand a year after expenses. Guess what med students want to do? You know, you spend 12 years in med school. You're 27 years old when you get in. You think people want to make 100 grand a year after picking up massive debt? No. So they invested massively. So in the ER departments in the UK, you walked in. On one side is a family medicine clinic that's open 24/7. 24/7. On the other side is the emerge department. People went straight to the family clinic for the sniffles and straight to an emerge bed. You got triage in the bed. The doctor saw you. The same nurse processed your orders. A decision to admit had to be made within 2 hours. As soon as the decision was made to admit, the consultants had 2 hours and the hospital had 2 hours to get people upstairs where they belong. I said, how can you do this? So they took me upstairs to the hospital. If you weren't sick, you were better, you had to get out of the hospital within 2 hours. You had to be discharged. And two, if you're a senior who's vulnerable, you had to get out of the hospital within 24 hours. That was the accountability for the community. To pull people out of hospital who didn't need to be there, who needed long-term care, home care, rehab care. So they essentially, Nate, created a pull system. If you incent people, first you have to resource people. You have to give them the money, the resources, the tools, the staffing, the education system. And it's a carrot. You give an incentive to pull some people out and a stick, a financial disincentive when you return people if you don't do your job. So now hospitals can function as hospitals. And the medical wars, their incentive, their accountability was if that's your patient, they got to get into your hands within 2 hours of decision to consult. And now the ER department can actually function. Now we can pull you out of the waiting room and pull you off the ambulance stretcher. We can put a patient through an ER bed every 3 to 4 hours. So we can do 6 to 8 patients an hour in an ER bed for sick people. But when 75% of our beds are plugged up by people, we're done with them. That's what's causing your ER crisis. And by the way, you're going to hear this from me. I called my ER doctor colleagues at the Grey Nuns. I said, guys, what the hell's going on over there? 70% of their beds were plugged up by admitted people. And then there's something, the internal and family medicine services, they said, we're full. We're not accepting any more admissions consults. So many more of the other beds that don't show up as an admitted patient, they essentially were admitted. They're admitted into the hands of the ER doc. They refuse to admit. So they were basically running their whole department out of 5 beds. And they had another death, Nate. They had 2 deaths that night, on that day, in that hospital. My colleague told me there was an elderly individual who waited 4 hours on an ambulance offload area, and they had a cardiac arrest. Then they became a CTES 1, and they got immediate care then, and they died. On the same day, Mr. Sri Kumar unfortunately died tragically, suffering meters from care. So was that a triage nurse problem? If triage nurse said that's a CTAS 2 or 3, they've done their job. They don't control the flow in the back. That's why I've called for an independent, apolitical, impartial inquiry into this by the Health Quality Alberta, the very organization Premier had me run. The people running the Grey Nuns and Covenant have to do their internal review. So does Acute Care Alberta, absolutely. And they have an ER doc in Calgary right now doing the review of the case. But was this a failure of one negligent triage nurse? Maybe. Or was this a system problem? And is the same thing happening in every ER in Edmonton and in Calgary? Nate, I went to work yesterday. I didn't get home till 3 in the morning, 4 or 5 hours after my shift was over. We are just slammed in the front lines with a lot of sick people, man. So let's not cast blame. Let's stop chucking arrows at one another. We're all in this together. Whether you're a lefty or a righty, I don't care. Let's just
What
talk about solutions to a complex problem. Crisis solutions, immediate crisis solutions we can implement right now to come back from the edge of the abyss. Short-term problems that can be implemented 30 to 60 days. And then medium term, long term, yeah. We haven't had a hospital in Edmonton for 38 years. We've doubled in size. And Edmonton serves a massively, Minister LaGrange asked me, she goes, why is Edmonton always in crisis? I said, Minister, short answer. Calgary's in crisis too, by the way. Calgary's surrounded by Medicine Hat, Lethbridge, Red Deer, and Edmonton to the north. And they got all the nice jobs in the offices, all the healthy young people going to the mountains. Edmonton, man, we got all the hard blue collar working people that are the engine of this province of this country. We serve a massively underserviced north and surrounding populations. Every emergency department around Edmonton, half of them are closed in small towns. We serve Northwest Territories, Northern BC, Yellowknife, and I think we're older, sicker population in and around Edmonton. Edmonton's always been a massive crisis, and yeah, it's so let's fix this stuff. Let's fix this problem.
what can the average Albertan do? Like one of the ideas that I've been kicking around in my head is, I think that more people need to be aware of the fact, A, that there is this tremendous backlog, and B, once you get in, as you said earlier on in the conversation, the care is amazing. Should people be taking to social media? Should be, I mean, like I'm looking at that heartbreaking video that the wife posted, and boy, did it get a lot of attention. And I feel like if people were comfortable, and they don't have to get into the medical specifics, but if somebody went to the Sheldon Schumer here in Calgary and they had a great experience and they were very happy with their care, then that's something that should be celebrated. And if somebody goes to, I'm not going to use a facility name, and has a bad experience where they had to wait too long because there were only so many functional emergency department beds, they can say, hey, it took me forever to get in. This isn't okay. It took my family member forever to get in. My family member was sitting in a hallway on an ambulance stretcher for an extended period of time. This isn't okay. If people start elevating those experiences, does that elevate the conversation high enough that it eventually gets to the premier's office and she stops listening to the crazy people?
Ah, I may not use those words. I'm not a Debbie Downer. Okay, I'm not a Debbie Downer. First of all, I want to celebrate the success of our Canadian and Alberta healthcare system. There is amazing stuff happening every day, Nate. Every day. I can't believe the type of care we can provide. My older brother had a horrible car accident in Calgary. It was all over TV. He ran his taxi cab into the bridge near the foothills. He tore his aorta. He put his hip into his pelvis. He had a liver. They floated in a 15 centimeter aortic graft and coiled his iliac artery. And he was on a ventilator for 94 days in Calgary and 6 months in hospital. I do not know. I thought, oh man, I would have wanted to die. I can't believe they saved my brother's life. Okay? We do amazing stuff. Our education systems are fantastic. Our healthcare staff are amazing. And we do amazing stuff every day. We do more amazing things every day than bad things happen in the system. I want to first celebrate our success. That's why let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, please. To those guys who think we got to go way of U.S. system, we do not want to bankrupt families. We do not want to bankrupt businesses and charge businesses $12,000 a year private insurance and have them go offshore like they did in the U.S. We have a really good healthcare system once you get in. The challenge is getting in. So let's identify why you can't get in. Let's identify the fundamental problems. Why aren't people getting into primary care? Why can't you get why does nobody want to be a family doc? Okay? Let's identify the problems and hit the bottlenecks of the system. Yeah, we got bad things happening every day as well. People waiting way too long for care, especially in life and death situations, and you can't get in until it's a life and death situation. Then in Mr. Shrikumar's case, he got care too late until they arrested, right? So it's a canary in the coal mine, Nate. I've always said, stop giving us ER doctors more money. We don't need bigger ER departments. Please do not put more staff in the ER. Right now, yeah, we should put a triage doctor in with their own nurse and LPN right now in a crisis, but that's a crisis protocol. But if you want to help us in the ER, what can individuals do? Let's talk about personal responsibility, right, Nate? I'm a big believer in personal responsibility, okay? Government can't and shouldn't fix everything for you. They can't, okay? And whoever says they can, they should stop promising that, okay? If I was your premier, I know I don't want to be your premier, by the way. It's a hard job. My family, I'm too old for that job. We need a leader who's going to be honest. Hey, if you're high risk, please go get vaccinated. Learn the risks and the benefits. No, we should not force people to get vaccinated. I'm against that. I voted against the vaccine mandates. I'm against it. But educate people. Here's the risks and benefits. If you're high risk, please get vaccinated. We got a couple of bad flu bugs out there right now. RSV, COVID, H1N1, and H3N2. Vaccines not so good for that one. It helps a little bit, but not that good. We knew this was happening because it came from Australia. So let's create our system and run it at 85% capacity. That way, when the flu hits, we were at 110, 13%, 100% before the flu hit. So what can individuals do? Get vaccinated. At dinner time, turn off your phones and get away from the TV and talk to your children and have a good dinner. You know, cut out the carbs, cut out the sodium, eat out once in a while. I don't want our restaurants to go bankrupt, but yeah, it's okay to eat out once in a while. Absolutely. But you know what? Eat healthy foods if you can. Walk every day 30 minutes. Mental health, talk to one another. Mental health addictions is a big problem. We got a lot of lonely kids right now, a lot of lonely people right now. Look after one another. If you got elderly parents or grandparents, please go visit them. My dad was dying in BC when I got divorced in 99. My life was absolutely wrecked in 99, but I had a duty to my father. I brought all my brothers here from across the country. I said, I'm not leaving Alberta. I love this place. We custom built a house to keep my parents with me. They helped me with the kids. And I helped look after, I taught my kids how to check my dad's insulin at age 10 and how to check his blood sugar and give him his insulin. And we looked after your dad as a family. Look after one another and look after your neighbor. If you have a vulnerable senior and you're a young, healthy person, please go shovel their walk, mow their lawn, check in on them. There's a lot of things individuals can do, and they can help out with the healthcare system. And
Talk.
every little thing can help. It's going to be thousands of little actions by by hundreds of thousands of good people out there. You know.
It's fascinating. The loneliness epidemic that you're talking about there. It's so true. And in so many of the conversations that I've been having with people over the last couple of months, the one thing that keeps coming to mind for me is I'm a big Vonnegut fan. I don't know if you've ever read the novel Slapstick. Uh, but it's Kurt Vonnegut's proposal in some ways as to how to make people less lonely because the problem that we have is that we have too many people who are trying to use too few people to be in a community, and we really, really do need more community. So I want to thank you so much for highlighting that. Is there anything else you want people to? Is there anything else you want to say? Is there anything else you want people to hear? Um,
Well, Nate, I'll tell you what's really bothers me. We got to stop chucking arrows at one another. Our politics has become so divided after COVID. I got friends on both sides of the debate. I do. We got to start being nicer to one another. Just because somebody's vaccinated or didn't get vaccinated, why do we have to disagree on everything? You know? And why? We should be nicer to one another. We got guys on the far left that agree on everything, and guys on the far right, and most of us are in the middle. And I'll talk. Gee, I talked to David Parker. Yeah, he's got some interesting ideas that might be out there. We don't disagree on everything. I'll talk to him like a civilized man. I'll talk to my friends on the far left as well. Dr. David Swan's a dear friend of mine. I don't agree with him on everything. He's an environmentalist, and I think it's important, but I don't agree with his economic views. But there's a respectful way that I think we can talk to one another. We're in it together. I'm an Albertan and I'm a Canadian. Okay? I love this country. There's only 40 million people here. There's hardly anybody here. Out of 235 countries, we're the fifth least populated on the planet. There's nobody in this country. I came from India, man. There's 1.5 billion people back there. I said, there's not that many of us there. People are blaming East Indians for causing all this problem. But uh, but I'd say let's just be nicer to one another, focus on the problems. Let's look at the facts and the evidence and the data. And if you really want to fix healthcare, let's educate our children. The moral test of a society, it was once said, is how we treat those, who walk in the shadows of life and the dawn of life and the twilight of their life. Our sick and elderly, our children. And I simply think we as a society can and should do better. So I haven't given up on Alberta. I haven't given up on this province. I'm not mad yet. I'm trying not to get mad. And and I want everyone talking solutions. It's okay to yell and scream, but you also have to talk solutions. And everyone has solutions, not just one political party. Um, yeah, that's why I'm not into partisan politics of any party. I've said the same thing in the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, Independent, UCP. And I simply think Albertans deserve better. And we can do better. I love this place too much. 5 million people love this place, so let's make it a better place.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And I agree with most of what you said there, sir, for the record. I think that we need to do a much better job as a society of having conversations. And I think that we need to do a much better job. Like, here's the thing for me. I'll just throw this in at the end because if I don't, people will message me. Um, I feel like legislating social issues is not the way to initiate change. I think the way that we initiate change is by doing all of the things that you've talked about there and having those conversations um, in those forums. And I look at like all of the things that the UCP government have done that have really pissed me off have been the legislating the social issues. And I just think that if everybody just instead tried to have conversations about those things from a rational standpoint, an evidence-based standpoint, as opposed to using them as weapons and punching down on the vulnerable, I'd be a lot less angry. I could do with being a lot less busy too. I would love to have less content to work with. Um,
Hey, Nate, you know what? I went to a town hall in rural Alberta in my little pseudo run for the UCP party. I said, guys, you know, I love you guys in rural Alberta. I'm a small town boy from rural India. I'm a farm boy from rural India. Grew up in Squamish, BC. Okay. My grandpa was a sugarcane dairy farmer and a rural doctor. So I'm a bit of a Indian redneck as well. I said, man, if a politician wants your vote in rural Alberta as a conservative, all we got to do is talk about guns, gays, immigrants, low taxes, and you got your vote. I said, have you any idea how many times you good people in rural Alberta have voted against your own self-interest? When you cut education, when governments go to war with teachers, the ones that educate our children, and nurses that care for our sick and elderly, and doctors, I said, have you any idea how many times you have voted against your own self-interest? I said, don't just vote conservative rural Alberta because, you know, I got mine and you go get your own. And so you have to think when you vote and you have to look at people's policies. The same thing in urban Alberta. Urban Alberta's gone far left. You know, let's come to the middle. What's missing in our society and politics is some common sense, Nate. When you got to legislate laws against poor kids who are questioning life, we all question life when we're teenagers. When you got to pass laws, that's a problem. Premier Prentice, God bless his soul. I was Liberal leader, and Lloyd Blakeman brought in a private member's bill to bring Alberta back up to date on human rights legislation. You know, gay straight alliances, on making sure we all treat each other nicely. Premier Prentice, he accepted that. And he's a conservative. Good human being. God bless his soul. Amazing individual. You know? And he brought Alberta up to date, and here we are taking Alberta back to 1950 again. Come on. Come
Yeah.
on, man. This is 2025, 2026 now. Let's take Alberta to 2050, not to 1950.
Well, let's deal with the real problems that we have ahead of us because I'm not convinced. I don't think that I'm 100% not convinced that many of the issues that this government has chose to exert significant energy on are the biggest issues that are facing Alberta. I mean, the book bans things. Come on, we got a healthcare crisis. Let's not worry about 5 books in schools. That's stupid.
Look, I'll tell you what really gets my goose. I'm a taxpayer. Everyone out there who's working hard, you're a taxpayer. The job of elected people is to take your tax dollars, get you the best public services. First of all, get you a good deal for your tax dollars, okay? Nate, maybe you do need a cheap Indian like me because I'm cheap, man. My mother has taught me not to waste money. Okay? One, absolutely. I would get a good deal from the unions. You got to pay them a fair wage. You got to get a good deal. You can't sell the farm to the unions. Also, with the business guys, I would open public tendering of contracts with double blinded bids. None of this lobbying come in the back door. You give me some money and I'll give you a good deal. You know, is that what happened in that surgical thing? That's got to stop as well. Okay. Our job is to get you a good deal for your tax dollars, not waste your money, stop buying votes, make investments in the right spot, and get you world class services. We're not getting good money value for our money right now for a tax dollar, frankly. I'm not a happy camper as a taxpayer, and I think we can provide way better services for the money that we're spending.
Awesome, sir. I'm going to end it on that note because I think that sums up the whole thing very, very nicely. Dr. Raj Sherman, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. I really appreciate the candor as well as all of the insight. And I hope we can follow up with for future conversations.
Nate, belated Merry Christmas to you and everybody, and Happy New Year, and God bless Alberta.
And that's it for another episode of The Breakdown. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here, we would love nothing more than if you thought about signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a fancy cup of coffee a month, you can help us continue to produce this kind of content. Whether you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, in which case maybe leave a review and a rating, or whether you're watching it on one of our streaming platforms, we want to say a big thank you to everybody who is part of the Breakdown's audience. And as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.